And here we are. Welcome everyone this evening. So if you haven't been to an Avid event before, please cast your mind to the our little shop in West End, on the back deck under the bougainvillea and the soundscape of West End that it is. And we're going to start right here. So my name is Bianca. And welcome to this special in conversation and launch of White Throat with Sarah Thornton. And I'll be your avid reader host for this evening. So please join me from wherever you may be to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. From where I call home, Meanjin, I pay respect to the Yagara and Turrbal people and to all elders past, present, and emerging. I acknowledge this land has always been and will always be a place of creativity, community, and storytelling. So, firstly, if you haven't attended an online event with us, which is quite different to an in person one, and we are very excited to be bringing a few of those back for the new year. So tonight's event, you will be placed on mute for the duration of the conversation. However, there is a chat function that you can use to communicate with me when we call for audience questions. This is where you can type them in so that I can read them out aloud. And please do feel free to send through your questions at any time. One important note I'll pass on shortly in the chat is the link to where you can purchase your copy of White Throat or of Sarah's previous book as well, Lapse, if you haven't got that one as well. So for the next 24 hours, you can use the code EVENT, which is EVENT, and receive 10% off your total online order with Avid Reader. And so without further ado, I will go and introduce our special guest this evening. So Sarah Thornton, who you can see on her with her lovely background of the Brisbane River there, she cast off the lines to her law career not long after being awarded Australian Corporate Lawyer of the Year in 2016. She now lives with her husband aboard a 43-foot sailing catamaran, exploring this most magnificent blue planet and chasing an endless summer. She took up writing novels as a way to liberate her imagination after 20 years in the structured confines of legal and corporate life. Her debut novel, Lapse, was published in 2019, and the follow-up, White Throat, was published in December 2020. So I think living that kind of lifestyle must be productive for a writer. Now, our in conversation person this evening for Sarah is the lovely Madeline Rebecki. Madeline is a book publicist based in Melbourne. Previously working in broadcast, media, and marketing, Madeline is now at Text Publishing, where she has worked on the campaigns for both of Sarah Thornton's novels, Lapse and White Throat. A very warm avid reader welcome to you both. Madeline, I will now pass over to you.
Thank you so much, Bianca, and hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the many lands from which we're zooming in tonight. I'm speaking to you from the Wurundjeri lands of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to Indigenous elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Now, there are very few authors who will ever tell you that their work or the publishing process is ever straightforward, simple or easy. However, launching a book into the world in 2020 in a year where all sorts of industries all over the world ground to a halt is an especially impressive feat. So firstly, Sarah, I wanted to say a huge congratulations on the publication of White Throat and welcome. It's lovely to be speaking to you tonight at the beginning of what we hope will be a much brighter year for everyone.
Thanks so much.
So, no worries. So I was going to ask you to read a little for us to begin with, but I was wondering if you could firstly tell us a little bit about White Throat and where it picks up after Lapse.
Sure. So welcome everybody, and thank you, Madeline and Bianca, for that lovely introduction. And thanks to everyone for joining in. White Throat starts almost immediately after the end of Lapse, but you can read White Throat completely independently. So what happens? She's basically she takes a house sitting job in Queensland after her successful footy season in Katinga in Victoria. She just wants to escape the fishbowl that's become because her past is she has a dark past, if you like, a shameful secret, and it's become open knowledge, public in Katinga. And she's just trying to kind of escape that for the summer and the off season. So we find her in Queensland, and she's house sitting this old fibro ramshackle shanty on the Fraser Coast, on the mainland, looking out across Fraser Island, or Kagari, as it's known. And it's not really house sitting the house. It's just a shack. But there's a beautiful, lovable, very, very large dog that she's looking after, along with her little dog Pocket. And what we do know about Clementine is she gets bored very easily. So she she gets involved in the local environmental campaign. They're fighting to save an endangered turtle. And that promptly puts her into the middle of a hotbed of local politics, because so many locals need and want this mining development to proceed, which is in its approval stages. And of course, the wildlife warriors are trying to shut it down. So she finds herself in the middle of that. She ends up basically, there is, as you will find out in the first couple of pages, a grisly death that does occur locally. And because the police believe it's suicide, and she just knows in her heart that it's not, she finds herself at the forefront of doing her own little parallel investigation, trying to convince the police to get involved, but without much success. So that's kind of the setup, if you like.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. And you had picked out a section from the sort of beginning of that investigation that you are going to read for us.
Sure. So I picked, one of the things about Clementine is, especially in Whitethroat, is, not being a cop or a detective, she has to find a way to extract information from people. She can't just go in with a notepad and ask for someone's alibi. So it's a lot more complex and kind of a different approach in this type of novel. So Clementine, in her usual fashion, makes sure she's in a position to be able to meet with the key people, and that's what's happened here. She's stepped up and put herself at the top of the environmental campaign, and now she gets to interview the leaders of the supporters of the new mine development. So this scene is where she's meeting one of my favourite characters, Ralph Bennett, otherwise known as Ralph the Resident President. He's the president of the Piama Progress Association. You can imagine he's pretty keen to see the mine go ahead. So this story, I don't think you need any more background than that. So I'll dive right into it. She was looking out from the dining room with Ralph, the resident president himself, in check shirt and brown shorts, smelling of deep heat, as he explained how he'd come to the Seascape Avenue subdivision 12 years ago. Got in first, he said, nodding proudly. Best block in the whole estate. Clem had heard Ralph got in first on most things, took his share, staked his claim, bullocked his way to the front of the queue. He'd chosen his home for their first meeting, Ralph's territory marked with Ralph scent, elephantine leather recliners, a framed fishing photograph of Ralph with a huge tuna hanging from a steely gaff, and instructions to his wife Selma to bring tea like she was his personal secretary. They sat down at the large dining table, and Selma laid the cups in front of them, darting back to the kitchen and appearing again with a plate of homemade Anzac biscuits. She smiled sweetly at Clem with her hair fresh out of rollers, soft curls around crinkled eyes. Thanks, love, said Ralph, lunging for the plate. Beautiful view, Mrs. Bennett, said Clem. She wanted to say, shamed to bulldoze it for a coal port, but held herself back. Selma turned towards the kitchen, and as soon as she was out of the room, Ralph started. Now, let me tell you a few things. He sounded like Clem's old high school headmaster. It made her feel cheeky, rebellious. She reached for an Anzac and took a bite. Still warm. Worked hard all my life, see? Had my own business, raised 4 kids, made enough for me and Selma to have our little piece of paradise up here. Grandkids can stay for school holidays, teach them to fish, get them outside, away from their apples and blackberries, into the sunshine. Selma can have a garden, play bowls once or twice a week. And believe me, we deserve it. Fair income, tax-paying Australians all our lives. The polite thing to do would be to say, too right, but Ralph didn't look like he wanted to be interrupted. So she nodded enthusiastically and kept her listening face on, chewing discreetly on the Anzac. Golden syrup crunch, soothing like home. So everything's peachy, just like we planned, until this bloke, this preening rooster came through town, Robert Considine. He scowled and leaned back in the chair abruptly, arms crossed tight on his chest. Clem could imagine Ralph swinging a gaff straight through Robert Considine's eyeballs. Yep, Robert Considine sold us a line. Could make one of those rhyming things out of it. What do they call it? Limericks, said Clem helpfully. Yeah, that's it, he said. A limerick. Only it wouldn't be anything I'd recite in front of a lady. He glowered at her for a moment, then looked away. She could tell he did not consider her a lady. More of a girlie, probably. She'd expected as much and didn't take offence. Ralph came from an era of unconscious patriarchy, as normal and healthy in a man as a bushy moustache or chest hair. She had already planned to play the part. You never knew what a full-blooded man of the 40s might let to slip to a harmless girlie.
Thank you so much for reading that section for us. It just, it's so evocative, like you can sort of see the inside of their house so clearly, and the dialogue is so great as well. With that sort of, you paint settings really, really well, and you've used place very carefully in your books. And Lapse, it was the sort of cold, foggy regional Victoria, and this time you've headed to the coast. What draws you to these settings, and what sort of inspiration did you take from your travels for Whitethroat?
Oh, sure. Well, Lapse, the setting was really driven by the character I wanted to write. And I mean, I really didn't know much about Northeast Victoria, but I needed a minor league country football team in the book that was part of the structure I had chosen. And so and I wanted the community to be really engaged with the football team. And so I wanted a little country town, you know, and it needed to be Victoria, because where else do you get that sort of engagement in AFL? Oh, other than Tasmania and West Australia and all those other AFL states. But anyway, so that was Victoria. I had to do a lot of research to get the feel of it right, because I really didn't know much at all. So when it came to Whitethroat, I was absolutely determined to pick a setting that I was very familiar with. And of course, that had to be Queensland. And I really wanted it to be somewhere where I could immerse myself in the early stages. So we were just moving on board our boat to live on our boat and heading north. And the first place you pretty much stop when you leave Brisbane, aside from Mooloolaba, is inside the Fraser Island, between Fraser Island and the Fraser Coast. It's a beautiful area, and it's the kind of Queensland I wanted, not the Gold Coast or, you know, the Whitsundays with beautiful beach and coral and all of that. I wanted this kind of mangrovey, big tidal flats, lots of shorebirds. That sort of setting was what I really wanted to play with, because it was so familiar to me from where I'd been living. So that's how this location came about. And that's how it started. The first scenes, I was sitting at caravan park bench by the beach, writing the very first scenes in a little town called Puna. And if there's anything that Pyama is based on, it's probably loosely based on the real town of Puna, but Pyama is, of course, fictional. So yeah, and then I got to really absorb that setting for about a week. We had Live Louder out, parked out front. I think it was high and dry. It's a very shallow entrance into the Puna River. And yeah, just kicked off the whole writing with that real sense of place in my head.
Brilliant. You can tell it really comes through your familiarity with the settings. And Clementine joins an environmental group, and the creature that they are aiming to protect is quite a unique one I'd never heard of before. Can you tell us a little bit about the white-throated snapping turtle?
Sure. Well, I really wanted to include the theme of species survival in the novel. It's one of my passions, and I think if you write what you're passionate about, it's so much more meaningful. Even though for me, writing crime thrillers, I mean, how much more fun can you have? And that's really the number one priority. But yeah, I always like to build in a little bit more satisfying material that kind of highlights something that I'm thinking about. And it's never sort of preachy or anything like that. In fact, when you hear Ralph's point of view in the remainder of that scene, you know it's a very convincing case that he presents. Mm-hmm. But the white-throated snapping turtle, so I knew I wanted to set it on that Fraser coast. Then I had to find my endangered species, because I follow the Tasmanian devil and orange-bellied parrot, swift parrot, all of these endangered sort of Tasmanian species. But I had to find one for this book. So I researched it, and I was so delighted when I found this little turtle, because he's quite special. He breathes through his bum underwater. They can be underwater for days on end, and that's their kind of defense mechanism to prevent them from getting taken by predators. And they hoover up algae and decaying and decomposing matter in rivers and keep them clean. So that's their kind of biodiversity role. And they're extremely cute. I found videos online, and I've never seen one. I've seen similar ones that also breathe through their bottoms, but they're not the actual white-throated snapping turtle. So that was the origin for that, and obviously has a place to play in the title. And one of the most pleasing things has been that readers have been telling me, I looked it up, it's real. And then so people are getting acquainted with this gorgeous little turtle. It's a wonderful byproduct of the book.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I certainly, I'd never heard of it before, and we were sharing some some videos around the office. They are indeed very cute. So I hope they're doing okay. Maybe this will raise some further awareness for them. I wanted to talk about the character of Clementine, because I just find her so intriguing. She's so tough, but she's so closed off. She's incredibly smart, and she is such a leader. She stepped in to coach the Katinga Cats, and she seems to sort of push herself even though she doesn't realise that she's doing it. Can you tell us a little bit about where the inspiration for Clem came from and how she sort of changes between Lapse and Whitethroat?
Sure. Well, with Lapse, that was the number one thing I had. I didn't know where I was going to set it, what it was going to be about, but all I knew was I wanted a really strong female protagonist who was a leader. I had read a whole heap of really brilliant crime novels that all quite often, I had one gripe about them, in that the female lead was, for instance, alcohol dependent or very passive in their community, like Girl on a Train. Okay, so she's lost her job. She just goes up and down on a train all day long. and she's alcoholic and so on. And so the kind of view we get of women in that sort of scenario is a very passive situation. They don't have control of their situation at all, and they're not really making a contribution to the community. And that's where it was coming from. Another one was Woman in the Window. So again, another drug-dependent woman who spends her life gazing at the world through the curtains in her lounge room. And so that was the driver. I really wanted a woman who's out there in her community. She's contributing. She's pretty screwed up herself, and she's actually left her own career, placed herself in a kind of exile, but she can't help herself. She's still out there making a difference, largely because she gets bored so easily and then she gets wound up in it. But once she's in, man, she really makes a difference wherever she goes. And you know, it was kind of important for me to write that. I wanted any young women or girls reading my books to kind of get a sense of to be empowered by that in some small way. Whether it does or not, who knows? But yeah, that was kind of a passion of mine to write that. You asked how she changes through the two books. Yeah. So in the first book, yes, she's very, very closed off. She's still reeling from this catastrophe that has happened in her life. And it's a kind of unspeakable shame that she hasn't found a way to live with yet. And she's just got her own strategy to try and work through it, and that is through cutting herself off from the life she had in Sydney. But when we get to Whitethroat, she's kind of already by the end of Lapse reached out to at least one person, and she's developed a couple of friendships, inadvertently or even against her will, really. But by the time we get to Whitethroat, she's starting to find herself, her way a little bit more. It's quite a marginal sort of growth for this character, but you do see it. And one of her good friends from Katinga comes up to Payama, and then you've got all the kind of complexities of that relationship in the book as well. But yeah, I think in Whitethroat, the key thing she's trying to work out for herself is, well, what do I do now? Do I go back to my law career, and back to the big city? And in fact, you find out in the first few pages that she's had an offer from a law firm. Or do I go back to little Katinga and coach another season of footy? What do I do? And she's just so unclear, and it's a real problem for her. She kind of finds that hard to work out. And by the end of it, we get there with an answer. Yeah, there, Maddie.
Yeah,
that's my answer.
Yeah, so
I covered that.
That's great. I did actually want to talk about Clem's friend, Matthew Torrens, who has many readers have said to you and have said to me that he is just the most wonderful character. He's hilarious. He's got such a checkered past, but he's just such a solid, good friend for Clem. Can you talk about Torrens a little bit and what inspired his character?
Well, sometimes, look, some of these characters are originating because you need them for the story. I felt that, for basically in the category of amateur sleuth as she is, she's not a cop, she's not a private detective or anything. She kind of needs a bit of help. She's a pretty straight gal from Sydney corporate circles, so she doesn't really know how to conduct herself in certain situations. And so Matthew Torrens came in as an ally, someone who could help her, and he does. He gets her out of some pretty tricky situations. He's an ex-standover man. He's basically been recruited and groomed and used most of his teenage years, basically because he's a giant of a man, and he's extremely loyal. And so he's kind of had this really torrid past, acting as standover man, very handy with crowbars and the like. And we do get to find out more about him in Whitethroat and just how savage his past has been. But he's trying to go straight. So you get this kind of lovely sort of moral reversal where the straight-laced corporate lawyer is being lectured by, you know, the ex-standover man who's just not been long out of prison on what her duties and obligations are and where she should be putting her time and energy to. And so I love that kind of upside down nature of it all. And it's quite a complex relationship. You can never tease it apart too much that one person's in the wrong, because it gets tested and strained to the nth degree. And, you know, it's never really a case of one's in the wrong and one's not. But I think Matthew Torrens I think he'd have a lot of loyal fans out there. He's a great guy. He's just a generous, big-hearted man, you know, and I've met many like that. So you ask, where is he inspired from? I could name countless, but, you know, characters are a blend of people you meet and people you imagine. You know, it's just a springboard for your imagination.
Yeah. One of the things that strikes me about your writing, and it showed through, as I said in that section you read earlier, Sarah, was is the dialogue. It's so colloquial and you absolutely nail it. Like, you know, you can really hear, you can pinpoint the type of person someone is instantly from reading a few lines of your dialogue. Do you find yourself when you're out and about sort of having one ear out and listening into people's conversations?
I'm not sure that I do, actually, to be perfectly honest. Look, I was sitting in the library, the University Library Cafe, which is kind of my summer office at the moment whilst we're in Brisbane. And you know, there was a real buzz there because the New Year's clicked over and the students are coming back, the staff are coming back. And there's these little meetings going on between, you know, these senior professorial types and their PhD students or whomever. And yes, I definitely listened into them. I think it's actually more to do with my varied connections. I mean, I have had the privilege to sort of span a wide variety of people in my life, from the executive end of the town and the corporate lawyer end of the town. And, you know, my husband's an electrician and an adventurer, four-wheel drive enthusiast. So and obviously a sailor, because I'm not the sailor, he's the sailor. So I meet all the people from his walks of life, you know, sitting around campfires with sailors and plumbers and the like, and they're all great people and they have their own way of speaking. And I think I've just probably absorbed it. I don't think there's any conscious sort of listening in or whatnot. But I do like to preserve some of that Australiana. You know, that's I think it'd be a shame. We get so much American pop culture here. I do like to kind of dabble in that Australiana as much as I can. But yeah, I think does that answer the question? Kind of absorbed it across all my. Oh, and I'm also a bit of a sporty spice. So I love, there's always sport in the book somehow. This is the off season, it's summer, but of course there's mention of cricket once or twice. I hope people will allow me that.
And I wanted to ask as well, so the characters of Ralph and Selma, who we met earlier, they're in financial distress, and you see the different sort of sides to the planning for the port, and you see Ralph's take on it, very, very kind of carefully balanced with the environmentalist view, I think. And did you have to research that sort of aspect, because they've gone through a sort of planning scam and they were trying to sort of find their way back from that? So how did that sort of come to you?
Yeah. Actually, I do know people in that situation. The characters are completely fictional and they're completely different to the people in my circle. But but the factual scenario is the same. And the financial distress from having, you know, decades of work of careful and prudent building up of a retirement fund, only to have it decimated after poor financial advice is not uncommon in this country and hasn't been solved by the Royal Commission into banking. Not yet, at least. I didn't need to research it a lot, no, because I knew it pretty back to front, and I knew the pain of it and the crippling nature of you know, mortgages late in life, big mortgages late in life, and yeah, that I wanted to build that in. I like my books. I like, these are all topical things. They're in my mind. They're in lots of people's heads, and they should be represented in fiction and kind of a light thrown onto them and dramatized so people get it. It's not just a news item that they might see in the newspaper or on Current Affair or whatever. It's actually people actually living it and how that impacts and plays out in their life. So yeah, that's where that Ralph and Selma Bennett, yeah, as I said earlier, I love them as characters. They really kind of fill themselves out as the story goes on, even though they're very minor to the story, or yeah, very secondary, I should say, but minor.
Yeah, I think that, well, I'm not going to give away anything, but there's a Ralph becomes pretty important a little later on. Yeah. So in a lot of crime fiction, obviously secrets are a big deal, and Clem sort of has a range of secrets, but you know, small communities are full of secrets, and I think those sort of corruptions and small town goings on that are in Lapse as well as Whitethroat are really interesting fodder for fiction. What do you think it is about small towns that makes them such perfect settings for crime?
Yeah, well, for me, I didn't actually think about it in that sort of frame so much, as I just wanted it to be a fictional place, because it gives you so much more flexibility. You know, I can have Clem in a little shack with an acre of bush on vacant blocks either side of her, and no reader's going to say, hey, that doesn't exist in Puna or wherever it is, right? So I can have the kind of location molded to how I want the story to flow. So that was the reason really for small towns, because I don't think I could really set it in a fictional city, or at least not a fictional big city in Australia. I mean, who's going to believe it if I say, you know, something other than Brisbane for the major city in Queensland, if I just made one up? I just don't think it'd be believable. Whereas you can kind of create these little towns very loosely based on places you've been or whatever, and it's okay. You've kind of got a permission to do that. I've not actually lived in a small town. I have lived in Coffs Harbour for 1 year, but really, other than that, I haven't. So the fact of so it's kind of incidental. It's not something I thought I want to write about small town secrets. I mean, there's always secrets in a crime novel, because that's what the whole purpose is, to get to the bottom of what the hell's going on. So I guess it's really kind of incidental rather than planned that way or themed that way. And in fact, I'm kind of thinking I might set one. I'm getting my courage up enough to set one in Brisbane. And have constrained by the river and the botanic gardens behind me, and you know, all of that but then that will kind of add a whole richness to it of its own. So I'm kind of now looking forward to that that kind of framework to set it in.
Yeah, there's a whole different kind of criminal activity that goes on in cities as Torrens. says.
Yes.
One of the things I want to mention about this book, it is the sort of book that you pick up for 5 minutes while you're making your cup of tea, and 3 hours later your coffee tea has gone cold and you're racing to get to the end of it. It is that readable. And I think one of the things that makes it so readable is your talent for writing suspense and action scenes. Do you have any tips, Sarah, or advice on how to write great suspense?
Yeah, look, I actually think it comes down to two key things, two drivers of all of us as human beings. One is curiosity, and one is our problem solving, innate kind of problem solving nature. And I think everybody has that to a degree. So I do try to write in order to engage both those drivers. So if you deconstructed the scenes in Lapse or Whitethroat, you usually find there's some sort of subtle or even not so subtle question posed at the start of the scene. Something we don't know, and then we want to find out the result. It's often tied to what the character wants. And is she going to actually get it by the end of the scene? And you don't even necessarily have to answer it by the end of the scene, but you may have a, almost to be continued, or it's answered yes or no, or partially, or whatever. And I think that curiosity, that's kind of a part of my writing technique, is to engage the reader's curiosity about all of those smaller questions, as well as the larger thing that's running along in the background. And there's at least two of those in the larger theme plot lines in Whitethroat. The other thing is, I mentioned problem solving. So that's, every writer's craft is to create conflict and tension, and the drama of that conflict and tension plays itself out on the pages. And I think our brains are wired to try and kind of find a problem solve through it, or even just that sort of schadenfreude that it's happening to somebody else and not you, and it's kind of, oh, ouch, oh, she said that, whatever. And so you really just want to see what's happening with that conflict and see it resolved. And so I think that's really how I've tried to do both my stories. Whitethroat has that kind of lurking threat in the background that's associated with both of the plot lines, both the Torrens, what he's kind of laying low from, and also the other main storyline. And there's kind of these lurking presences in the background that pop up at various points in the story. And I think they just naturally create a hell of a lot of suspense, because the reader knows about those folks, those dark, creepy sort of people in the background, but Clementine and Matthew Torrens have no idea. So that kind of naturally creates its own layer of suspense as well.
And I think there was a third sort of small suspenseful strand in that when Clem got the offer, I was like, what are you going to do?
Oh, yeah.
That's the way to the end. I wanted to go back to Katinga.
Yeah, so that's exactly, that was one of the bigger questions was, what will Clementine do? Does she go back to the footy or in Katinga? And she's got a lovely little cottage there. She bought it with Gran's inheritance and some savings. She really kind of starts to enjoy it. But then again, this wonderful offer from a Melbourne law firm, and she's negotiating with them, and it's so tempting, and she could pick up her career again. So you don't know which way it's going to go. The last page.
Yeah. We're going to open up to audience questions in just a little bit, but I wanted to ask one sort of final question for now, which I love finding out from authors, is do you read a lot while you're writing, or do you find that sort of messes up your process? And if you do read, what do you read while you're writing?
Sure. I definitely read. I know a lot of authors are worried that the writing style of another author will sort of kind of influence you and take over your voice as a writer. I don't really think that's the case, at least for me. I actually get quite inspired by it, and I will read all sorts of books. I recently read Catherine Jinks' suspenseful, wonderful little novel called Shepherd. And, she uses words so sparsely, and yet it's so painfully moving. And, that kind of, I do look at things a bit technically, and I kind of think, well, how has she managed to do that? So I'm kind of learning, but I'm writing my own stuff. I don't feel like I'm absorbing too much of it. I'm just kind of understanding it from a technical point of view. I don't think it interferes with my voice at all. Another one, for instance, I've got Aaron, I can never say her name, Arundhati Roy, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. That's on my bookshelf at the moment. Now, I find literary books these days kind of a bit slow quite often, and I prefer a story, but I can pick up something of that quality, and in any paragraph you read, it's got shining, just beautiful prose. And I just find that just generally inspiring. I'll go back, especially if I'm in editing mode, I'll go back and I'll look at, well, how have I structured that, and how did I say that? And I'll tweak it and try to build that beauty into it, or that power. Quite often with a Clementine Jones story, it's kind of boom, power and action, as you say. And it inspires me to read these great writers to improve, what poor little old me is trying to do in my books. So yeah, I read. I don't read a huge amount. I've got a lot of stuff going on a boat. There's lots of fishing and snorkeling and all sorts of things. I can't really read as much as most writers do, I suppose, but yeah, I definitely read.
Yeah, it sounds like you're not you're not going to be stuck for things to take up your time. So
no, not at all. And we don't have a dishwasher, and it takes forever. You got to go in a dinghy to go and get your shopping and load the dinghy, unload the dinghy. Everything takes longer on a boat. So
yeah, I can definitely imagine. I think, Bianca, are you ready to head to some audience questions? Have we got anything coming through? Or?
Yeah, we've got plenty of questions and lots of comments. Lots of love for your reading earlier, Sarah, which I thought was brilliant as well. You just nailed the voices in there. So I hope you have an audio book.
Oh, there is an audio book for Whitethroat. Yeah.
Right. Do you narrate it?
Oh, no. There's a lady, I've forgotten her name, but she does a wonderful job.
Yeah, I thought you did the voices really well. So let me get on to the questions. We've got more flying through at the moment. So I will start with the first ones that came through, and we will see how we go. We've got a good amount of time left. So, all right. So our first one came through from Tim. And Tim says, the mine that Clem and co are trying to stop, is it coal mining? Why I ask the question is that both Sarah and I have worked in the mining industry and wonder, has inspiration come from her experience in the sector?
Absolutely, Tim. You've nailed it, as you always did when we worked together. Yeah, it's coal mining. Look, you see sort of similarities with the Darney. There's a port. They need to build a port to get this stuff out. So forget the Wide Bay Bar, that's got to be dredged between Fraser Island down the southern end and down to Inskip Point, so the ships can get in and out. Yes, that did help with understanding it. But you know what? Probably my airport job where we were at Brisbane Airport, massive infrastructure project building a third runway. One of Australia's biggest infrastructure projects at the time. That might have even informed it a bit more, because I got closer to the whole environmental approvals process and so forth, and how these big projects go ahead. So that kind of provided me with a nice backdrop as to how to write that and who would be running it. You've got this executive what's his, Scott Stanton Green, or otherwise known as the Hyphen. He's kind of responsible for delivering this thing. And, you know, I know what that kind of role demands. So he doesn't resemble anyone at Brisbane Airport or my previous mining role, by the way. But yeah, good question.
Yes, and thank you. We've had a lot of interaction on the chat tonight, which has been fantastic. So there's been lots of compliments on your ability to create suspense and put your protagonist, you know, just raising those stakes. So I think this is definitely a second book to watch out for, and more to come. Now, so our second one came from Sarah. So Sarah has a question about if you've had any feedback from the environmental sector about drawing attention to the plight of the turtle.
No, I haven't. I haven't really, not yet. Look, that might come. It's only been out a few weeks, so I'd love for them to enjoy it. But you know, as I say, it's a crime thriller first and foremost, and both sides of that argument, I hope, are portrayed in a relatively balanced manner. I mean, you probably get the feeling of, when you read about a turtle hatching, I hope people can't help but feel an affinity with that little critter, you know, because that's where my kind of heart lies. But yeah, look, maybe that'll come in time. Paul Hawken, who gives the epigraph at the start, was very kind to allow me to use his words, and he has a copy. I might see if I might give him an email knock and see if he's read it.
Yeah. So going on to our next question, and Tim, I have seen your other question pop through, so if we have time, we will definitely get to that one if we can. Thank you. So, and part two of Sarah's question, which came in straight away afterwards, was saying that your dialogue is really authentic. Sarah, do you read your scenes aloud to yourself or someone else to test it out during the writing process?
Great question, and I should is the answer to that, and I don't. And sometimes when I do these readings, I realise, and do you know, I changed 2 words in that reading. Hopefully no one picked it up, but they just sounded better. And I really should be reading it aloud to myself. It's probably a discipline I need to weave in, because I think that really makes a difference. I'll give you one here. Okay, so the last line I read was, "You never knew what a full-blooded man of the 40s might let slip to a harmless girlie." So I'd written the 1940s, and I said the 40s. Yeah, because I was hopeful, didn't want people to think he was 40 years old. But, you know, like, yeah, I think it's a really good technique if you're a writer to do that. And I should do it more often.
I know myself included, and I know we have a lot of writers in the audience and who attend a lot of our events as well will appreciate that that sort of advice. So great question, thank you, Sarah.
And really good question. And I tell you, when you get found out is like this, when you're asked to do a reading.
Something as minor as dropping 19 off the 40s.
Oh, there was another one as well. I think I dropped an I. I worked hard all my life, see? So I just said worked hard all my life. That's probably better. Anyway, very pedantic. Writers have to be so pedantic.
So Bailey has a question. I'm assuming it's Bailey V says, I've already purchased a copy. I'm loving the growth in your writing, descriptive suspense and unpredictable storyline. Congratulations, Sarah.
Oh, thanks so much, Bailey.
And Bailey's question is, you mentioned that you wrote Whitethroat while on your boat. Was it easy to create the space to be able to craft your book as compared to an office on land?
No, that's one of the challenges. But I have a very, very understanding husband who knows my whole kind of thing with being on a boat is writing novels whilst living on a boat. It was a kind of a package deal. And Dino loves living on boats. So he's very understanding and kind of keeps out of my way. Sometimes he'll be chattering away and I'll say, okay, I got to focus on this, because it's a very small space. You know, it really is. I liken it to two very skinny caravans joined together. So you can imagine. But I get to get off the boat. You know, most of my writing is done when we're at anchor somewhere or moored somewhere. For instance, here in Brisbane, I'm working in the QUT library where they allow me to go free of charge, and it opens at 8, which is a bit late for me. I'm an early bird, but anyway, that's pretty good. And up at Early Beach in the Whitsundays, I was able to go to their library quite often. So I do get off. I get into a coffee shop sometimes. Look, I can write outside on the deck when I'm writing a first draft because I write by hand, my first draft. So there's kind of other options rather than just sitting where I am now. But I would say probably a fair proportion is done right here, which is both our saloon, galley, and office. So yeah, one of the small challenges with boats.
Love it, but room with a view.
Yes.
Can't beat that. So we have a couple of other questions. I'm just going to go over to the chat, and I do apologize. That was the Vanessa before, Vanessa Bailey. Thank you for that correction as well. Let's have a look here. So I've had a fair few comments since then, so I'm just going to go back up to where I saw a couple of questions before. Okay, this is a good one from Jane. So what is your writing process, and has it changed throughout the process of writing the 2 novels?
Sure. Yeah, my writing process, I just alluded to it earlier. I do write the first draft. Lapse, I wrote the entire first draft by hand. So when I type it into the laptop, it's kind of a second draft already. And I'll write one scene at a time, maybe 3, maybe a chapter, maybe 3 or 4 scenes in a clump if I can. And then I have this kind of reward of typing it into the laptop, because the first draft stage is grueling. It is brain sapping. I find my imagination's probably, needs a bit of stoking, and to write on a blank page like that, it's quite difficult, very challenging. So it's kind of a reward to be able to type it onto the laptop, and you're just typing away. And the reason for that is when you use a laptop, you're editing straight away. Particularly I am, since I'm so familiar with the software, the Word software, and editing as a lawyer. Every document's picked over 3,000 times. So it stops me from editing. It allows me to my thoughts to flow more freely. As I've gone on, so with Whitethroat, I did probably half of Whitethroat by hand first. I'm finding I'm able to let it flow a bit better. Kind of my brain, I think, is being retrained with the way I go about it over time. I don't plot or plan. I have sort of kind of general ideas, but I don't know where I'm headed. I quite often, in fact, both books, I didn't know who the villain was up front. So that's as much a surprise to me. Well, it kind of grows as you go into the story. You get a feel for where it should go. But I certainly don't know when I first start out. And I like it that way. I like to have as many plausible suspects as, possible, and they need to be plausible in every respect. I don't like just throwing a red herring in just for the sake of it, my editing, Lapse was 5 drafts before it went to the editor at the publisher, and Whitethroat was 4. So maybe I'm getting quicker. I don't know. I tend to write in the mornings most, but at the moment, because I'm in the library, I'll write all day.
That's amazing. I'm always fascinated by that that sort of insight into a writing process, and I know that will be the case for readers and writers alike who are joining us this evening. So thank you for sharing that, Sarah. Now there was just one more question from Tim, and it was about why choosing a place such as, I guess, somewhere like Puna, like you've mentioned, the fictional sort of town is based on the setting. Could you sort of maybe give us a few minutes while we've still got a minute or two left, based on your setting and why you choose a particular setting?
Yeah, so with Lapse, as I mentioned, it was entirely driven by the story. I ended up in a around that kind of Myrtleford, Benalla, Wangaratta area, and it suited me to be there. I had to have a country minor league, footy league, as I mentioned, but I really wanted to write wet forests. I wanted rainforests, but there wasn't any really that I could hang my hat on in the general area that I was looking at. So it's kind of wet sclerophyll, I think you call it. I love writing that, that there's scenes where Clementine is going up her windy road, Makepeace Road, to her little cottage, and the elbows in the road full of ferns and green, lush forest. And I deliberately did that too, because this is a bit naughty, but The Dry had been such a big seller by Jane Harper. Beautiful, wonderful book. And I just wanted to write the wet. I really did. And I thought, coming from Tasmania, there's plenty of places that aren't sunburnt and drought-ridden all the time. I mean, Tassie gets its drought as well, but there's plenty of beautiful places in Australia that aren't outback, and I kind of really wanted to write the contrarian view of Australia. And I guess you're kind of seeing that a little bit, that contrarian sort of approach a little bit with Queensland, where I wanted, the Brisbane type Queensland, not the Gold Coast type Queensland, the mangroves and the tidal flats and the soldier crabs and sort of soggy sand, if you like. It's not quite as picturesque in some respects, but it's got its own quirky beauty, and that's kind of, I just wanted to write what was so familiar to me.
Yeah, I can definitely relate as a reader, just a writer, starting with that evocative setting, and that sort of shapes very much the atmosphere for the story.
That said, I have got an idea for a story set on a beautiful Great Barrier Reef island surrounded by fringing reef, and yeah, so who knows, I might get to write that one day.
Wonderful. Well, look, everyone, we are out of time, although I could definitely keep listening for hours. I am just about to post another link and where you can follow and find out a little bit more about Sarah's book, and you'll also receive an email with those details and how you can find out about more avid reader events if you've enjoyed tonight's discussion, which we certainly have. Madeline or Sarah, did you have any sort of final comments before we open up to our applause?
Not for me. Just thank you so much, Bianca.
Yeah, big thank you to Avid. Thank you so much for hosting, and to you, Bianca, in particular. And thanks everyone for supporting these events. So great. Authors' jobs are really lonely, very solo. There's really see all these faces. I'm just loving this. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. And yes, thank you so much to everyone for supporting Avid Reader. It's truly been a momentous year, and we're just so excited to be starting the new year and welcoming you. Those of you who are in and around Brisbane, please pop in and say hello, and we'll be in touch. So without more ado, I'm just going to let everyone, so you'll be able to unmute yourselves, and we will join Sarah and Madeline tonight in a big round of applause to say White Throat launched in true Avid Reader style. Thank you.
Everyone on mute. I can see.
You are able to unmute yourselves. Don't be shy. If you've got the book, hold it up. Feel free to shout out any comments from the audience as well. We've got a few of you. I know that in the beginning, Sarah Jan Butler wanted to say hello from Hobart. So thank you, Jan.
Jan, thanks for joining. And Shani's joining from her catamaran. Hey there. Sharon, how you doing, buddy? Sorry, I can't say hello to everybody, but there's a few there that I haven't seen for a while.
Good one.
Some that I'll be seeing soon.
Wonderful. Congratulations again, Sarah. I'm going to say good night and have a good evening. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.